whenever we join this discipline of radiation oncology, one of the first things which actually comes to us as a shock, and these days before we join that, we'll have to learn physics, that to medical physics. And many of us had become doctors because we may have scored well in physics, but really we did not like mathematics or physics. And that's why we chose biology and medicine. And that was, for some of us, it was true. And again, you have to learn medical physics. And that could be unnerving sometimes for some people as to why they have to, study physics and what are the things that would bother them. So all of us have gone through this, that physics, it's so difficult to understand. First of all, we don't understand why do we have to understand so much of physics? What does it help? Why do we have to learn about Xray Tube, which was, made 100 years ago, or a little less than that? Why do we have to learn about radium, which is of not any relevance right now, about radioactivity, which we don't use very often unless we do brachytherapy? So I will today talk about medical physics concepts, not all the concepts, but some of the concepts for radiation oncologists. And I'll be using analogies from the world of art. World of art, as you can see, this palette of beautiful colors with brush and tubes, different kinds of colors are there. And I will draw some analogy and discuss. Yes. Okay. So, some of you may not recognize this thing has been painted so well. This is an offset, which is an immobilization device and with a messy. So this has been used. This is on the website of the company which makes offset, which is a thermoplastic mold. And just to show that some art, this is for the patient, must be a child patient who's a fan of Messi and you can use that. And then this is something what we call dose painting. And this picture shows that you're treating the posterior fossa, most likely a medulloblastoma. And this is with the use of photons, and this is with the use of protons. The colors, different colors represent different levels of dose that you give to different parts of the brain and critical structures and the tumor. This is dose painting. So this is all art. I mean, one could look at art. And actually, this term is used, now for more than 20 years, painting dose or dose painting, the art of radiation. I have not coined this term, this exists. And there was a very interesting physicist, Clifton Ling, in the earlier days of IMR. Before VMAT, they used to popularize this term. And you can please mute yourself, please. So, you can see in those. This doctor who's giving radiation with a very primitive X-ray machine to the breast, he's actually in his mind conjuring some idea as to how much dose will go there. This is the time when there used to be skin erythema dose, and that through that, whatever the erythema happens on the skin, overlying skin, he would imagine, okay, this is a dose which would have gone to the tumor in the breast and the underlying ribs. Now, this picture I have taken, and you've seen that this is a recent University of Uppsala. So dose painting. So can radiotherapy be improved with image-driven dose response derived from retrospective radiotherapy data? So a lot of people are applying the AIs, the machine learning, all those aspects. So, but still we are looking at controlling the doses. And here you can see this, someone has painted the universal man, and there's a ratio in this universal man. So this is the whole, so we are coming from just treating doctors to artists and painters. So all of you know this, widely known painting of Mona Lisa. And what I'm showing Mona Lisa here is this a beautiful painting here refers to, in terms of radiation oncology, refers to a masterly use of ionizing radiation to paint colors and the lines, required doses and intensity on the canvas of tumor without spoiling, when you say spill, without spoiling the normal organs and all inside the frail frame of human body. Why I've used the frail frame? Every patient of ours is not frail, but no matter how good, strong you are, and high enough doses of radiation can make that body frail and could have devastating late effects or acute and late effects. So you have to respect that the human body. I think that is the first thing, the human body and the normal organs of the human body. So this is how we refer to it. So can we say I'm an artist? Can all radiation oncologists say I'm an artist? So all of us. Just 1 second. I'll have to mute all. I'll mute all. Okay. So when I use this term, I'm an artist. I found this thing very interesting. 7 ways to increase your confidence as an artist. And what this artist and author has written about artist is applicable to all of us when we start our training as radiation oncologists and when we are young faculty and sometimes that we are very senior faculty. Self-doubt. So what it says is artists are especially prone to self-doubt due to the nature of our work. We pour our hearts and souls into the creation, whether it's painting or sculpting or writing or crafting. And new training will be doing contouring, and intermediate level training will be doing putting some beams, and the faculty would be creating the plans along with the physicist. So self-doubt happens with all of us. And I think as an artist, as I will talk about in radiation oncology, if you know certain things, you would have less of self-doubt. And this is another artist, Jody, who actually mentors artists and who wants to monetize their art. So whenever we monetize our skills of giving radiation, that is what we'll have to do to earn a living. You have to treat that many patients on a given machine with that particular technique. And for all that, you have to create the artwork, the dose painting. So whenever we are monetizing, there is a risk of losing our creativity. And I think that could happen if you haven't really, when you become a commercial artist, if you haven't really understood not just the tricks of the trade, but the very basic elements of the trade. And that's when I will come to using the analogy of the art. So this, what I'm showing here, this is a man who's an old man who is an artist. Someone call him just a painter. He has the artwork sort of hung around the wall. It's a beautiful wall with the plants, and he has different paints. And so this is the art, this is the color, and these are the coloring instruments, and this is the artist. So all these things you are here, and one could say that maybe he's just a commercial artist. Well, he is a commercial artist because everyone has to earn a living. So he's just drawing, sunflowers or some skies, which are very common things. He's not drawing anything abstract. Maybe you can see some abstract, but he has learned this over a period of time. But even for a commercial artist, like many of us are, we have to earn a livelihood. His knowledge about the colors, the canvas, and the coloring instrument is very important. So an artist can make a beautiful creation only and only if he or she has a good and a sound knowledge, not just the knowledge which you can gain by reading or listening, but the feel which is from experience of the canvas, its type and texture, the colors, its shades, types and appeal, in the colors of different shades and types and appeal, the coloring instruments of use. You may have many coloring instruments, but they're not used to you, then you cannot really do anything. More importantly, this artist can conceptualize, imagine, and look above the eyeglasses and foresee how the finished work would look. And finally, respect the critics and is a commercial. So, all these are big terms, so what does it mean, in terms of a radiation oncologist? How does it apply to us? So I will try to show some of those things. So like an artist. So first we'll talk about the artist. The artist here is, let us say, artist in making the radiation oncology trainees who one day would create beautiful pieces of art where they have treated the tumor and saved the normal tissue. So here I am showing a picture of our department, faculty of the Department of Radiation Oncology. Some of you would be here, some of them would be your mentors, and you would see, so we are all artists. So before we became artists, we have learned about the canvas, which is the human body, the colors, which are the different types of radiation, and the coloring instruments, which are the different equipment. But more than this, I think we as an artist, we are not just alone, along with our physicists and technologists. In addition to our knowledge and skills of color, canvas, and the coloring instruments, we have to have a vision of healing without hurting. So this is very important. I think once that is your vision and that is your motivating force, you, even if you haven't understood a particular canvas or a color instrument well, because it is required for the patient you have in front of you, you will learn that. And I think medicine is all, it's a lifelong learning. Medicine, just to think, if you put in the first day, you have to learn difficult things. Your entire career, you will have to learn. And I think this is a driving thing, a vision of healing without hurting. So again, I come back to this artist. So the canvas. Now from the artist, we are moving to the canvas and its types and textures. So this is the canvas. You could say the canvas is just human anatomy. Gray's Anatomy, you know, it's the big fat book. All of us were scared when we joined medicine. The different planes, sagittal plane, coronal plane, transverse plane, you reconstruct these planes. And this is the surface anatomy. I mean, I've drawn this on the blackboard, and you know where, you know, how different organs look, the shape, the size, the relationship, anatomical relationship. So this is all do we need to know, or is it more than this in the canvas? So I think there is much more to this inside the surface and inside, and much more than the planes, sagittal, transverse, and coronal planes. So the canvas, its type and texture, it is the surface and the shape, and not just this, the planes and the relationship. We're not looking at just the different planes, but the relationship between organs, between the tumor and the normal tissues. What is the physiology of these normal organs? How much reserve is left in these normal organs? How much tolerance they have for a particular type of radiation? If there's a bone in between, the bones have calcium, patient may have a metal implant, all these aspects. Then you may have air and the water and the density. So you might just think, well, air doesn't really matter, I'm using photons, and or the bone doesn't matter because I'm using photons, high energy photons. Suddenly you have a new machine which can give protons. And then again, you have to think of the canvas in a very different way than what you were thinking. Then there's a motion, there's a rhythm in the motion, and the change in the shape of the canvas, including the tumor. And not only what is seen, but also what is not unseen. That's why everything that you do not see also is you take into account. And if all this was not there, then you will just make a plan and fire it on a phantom, water phantom, which is a uniform. And we say human body is almost entirely equivalent to human, in water, and you know what will happen. But unfortunately, it is not as simple, because our canvas has a lot of variety, and even if you spend the whole life, you will still not understand this canvas very well. You'll have to individualize. And imagine if you have the heart and the lung, the relationship, the movement, and various things that you could do. And if the canvas is not just the human body, the normal organs, it is also the tumor. The tumors have different size and shape, the relationship of tumor, the normal tissue, the motion and changes, the tumor also shrinks. You could do adaptive radiotherapy. You would have all these terms when you think of, this is a background. In the seen and the unseen, the subclinical disease, the potential to double how fast they multiply, when they invade, where they invade, and how they spread, the biology and responsiveness, the stem cell, the stroma, and heterogeneity. So it's a gross tumor, the microscopic tumor, the stroma, the epithelial mesenchymal transition, then at the molecular level. So you go from a 2D planning, you simple looking at the tumor, marking that, and you treating that, to their time will come, you will do molecular radiotherapy, where taking into account the molecular genetic makeup of the tumor, you would individualize your type of radiation, the dose of radiation, and already people are doing biological dose planning. So the DNA damage, as we know that DNA is the main element, or the main thing which the ionizing radiation causes an effect. It could be direct or indirect effect of radiation. It may be repaired or may not be repaired, or only partially repaired. And this term molecular radiosensitivity. So the 5 R's of radiobiology, when you will read about it, the 5th R is the least understood, and it may be as important as the first 4 R's of radiobiology. I will not go into the details of radiobiology because that will be in a separate story we will talk about. So this also is part of the canvas. This slide, courtesy Dr. Overgaard. He is a very famous radiation oncologist and a clinician scientist who shared with me some years ago. And it is not just the hypoxia, and there's so many modifiers of hypoxia, and how it affects the gene profile, the expression of different genes, and you can measure the hypoxia. And if you modify this hypoxia, you take care of this, it could also improve the outcome of, here the example is of head and neck squamous cell carcinoma after radiotherapy. Now I will come to the colors. So we've talked about the artist, who's the radiation oncologist, along with the medical and technologist. We've talked about the canvas, its types and texture, which is the human body, the organs, the tumors, and not just the gross, but at the molecular level. And now we will talk about the colors, its shades, types, and appeals. So the colors are, so this, what I'm showing here is sun gods and goddesses. So they not just, if you think of in India, we have a Surya. Almost every civilization had sun gods and goddesses. So from Japan to Apollo in Greece and Rome, to Iran in the famous sun god Ra in Egypt, and the Inca sun god. So radiation oncologists, we are the modern peaceful energy worshippers. So why sun was worshipped? Because we knew that the source of energy on this earth all comes from sun. And we are the modern peaceful energy worshippers. There are a lot of energy worshippers who are not peaceful, and they are archaic. So, but actually we are modern peaceful ionizing energy worshippers. So the spectrum of energy, the main energy is electromagnetic radiation. Of course, you could have the particulate radiation also. So you can see from radio wave, as the wavelength increases, the wavelength decreases and the frequency increases. From radio waves, which are just used for broadcasting radio and television, to X-rays, ultraviolet rays, X-rays, and gamma rays. So this is the spectrum that we use as an artist. We use basically X-rays and gamma rays, not ultraviolet rays or the visible light that we use only as part of our machines to see the optical fields and other things. So this is what we use. So as the energy increases, it is more penetrating and it will have more energy packed into it, and it can cause biological damage. And that is what we are interested, because as radiation oncologists, we give radiation. As radiologists, we take X-rays, because radiologists, diagnostic radiologists, are interested in the X-ray beam which comes out. And as radiation oncologists, we are interested in the energy which is absorbed inside the tumor from the X-rays that we are giving, exposing the body to. So we are interested more in the biological effects of the ionizing radiation. So then it comes to the electromagnetic radiation. So electromagnetic radiation, it has dual nature, wave theory. I think someone very famously said, on Sundays and Wednesdays, it is a particle, and on other days it is wave. Then in free space, they all travel in straight line. And as radiation oncologists, you know that so many things about what we learn, whether it is giving how much of gap you should do between the two fields, or how much will be the divergence, and what will be the field size on the surface and on the tumor. It is just because of the straight line, the geometry. So a lot of things, concepts could be understood by just taking a pen and paper and drawing something to a scale. And you will, because it is geometry, and because in free space it travels in a straight line, and because it travels in straight line, you also it also travels with a certain speed. And once in an exam, it was a difficult question. I mean, later on I realized, I asked, how much time will it take from the X-ray beam to reach from the source to the patient isocenter, which is 100 centimeter, which is 1 meter. So really, if you know the speed of light, you can calculate. But for the examinee, I read it right. It was a very difficult question to answer, but this is what it is. Then the energy which is transferred and the inverse square law, how this inverse square law is derived, it is inversely proportional to the 1 upon distance square. It is basically the energy is isotropic emission of energy, and it is distributed over the surface of a sphere. And as it passes through the matter, passes through the matter, its intensity is reduced by process of attenuation, absorption, and scattering. And I will not go into the details of it today. The whole chapter of interaction of X-ray with matter in Meredith Messy, this beautiful chapter, and that's another storytelling session we will have later. I think next month. So this is for when you're trainees, you have to understand why do you have to read this boring chapter of interaction of X-ray with matter. How does it matter photoelectric effect? It doesn't really happen with the energy that we use. Why do we have to read about pair production? I mean, how does it matter the Compton effect? Because that's the only effect which is happening. So why do you have to distinguish what energy with what Z or the atomic number, what interaction is happening? So this we will discuss later, but suffice to say that when you become an artist, not only you have to know the canvas, which is the human body, the organs and the tumor, you also have to know the colors. And this is a very intrinsic property. And this is the passing through the matter. This is where the colors, that means your ionizing radiation, they're interacting with the in progress. So whenever an artist is painting something, they know how this color, especially when watercolor, all of us would have remembered that when we apply the watercolor, when it is wet, it looks a little different. When it dries up, the color looks a little different. Different colors look on different surfaces, they look different. So, and when you mix colors, again, they look different. You can't always predict when you mix these two colors, what will be the resultant color. And, when you put a layer on something. So, an interaction of X-ray with matter is basically how your colors and canvas interact. And that will be another session we will have. So, here, so the only source of ionizing radiation for radiation oncologists comes from the atoms, and these are generally heavy atoms. So heavy atom means where the Z, where the number of protons, the atomic number is high, and we have a vivid palette of X-rays, gamma rays, beta rays, electrons, protons, and heavy ions. And if this is a very old picture I've taken from Meredith Messy. This is the cloud chamber, a photograph which shows the tracks of ionization. So you can see a linear track of sparsely ionizing radiation. These are tortuous tracks of low energy electrons, and how towards the end all the energy is deposited. So because this is the tracks of ionization, and it all points down to the nucleus. The structure of nucleus is the main thing. How many protons and neutrons it holds there, how heavy it is. Each contributes to one mass. And the electrons and electron clouds. And suddenly you might say, well, how does electrons matter? Because we're using, high energy, and where it's only the Compton effect. We're not using, low energy X-rays where it's a photoelectric effect. But in Compton effect, it's the electron cloud. So everything in the atomic structure matters to us. It is, unless until we understand the atomic structure, we will not be able to understand the colors that are produced from an atom. And that is all we use, the colors which are produced from atom. It may be intranuclear because of disintegration of the nucleus, which are radioactivity, or maybe extranuclear, which is X-rays. So this I'm showing again, I've used many pictures from Meredith and Messy. And so you can see this is a visible light. So this is a different spectrum. And then these are the characteristic spectrum. So this is for sodium. You say sodium light is of a particular color. Sodium light is yellow, all of us know. And then this is mercury light, which has different things, and it is mercury light. So this continuous and line spectrum. And this very simple, important thing is of relevance when your coloring instrument, which is an X-ray machine, X-ray tube, produces different kind of colors. So both continuous spectrum as well as characteristic spectrum. And that will, when we talk about filters and different things, this is important. Now, the periodic table, I think this is one of the greatest, thing which ever came to human mind, that someone imagined the periodic table and predicted which are the missing elements. And for us, it is important that the heavy element, some of the elements that we use, like this is the iridium here, and there is a cobalt there, iridium and radium, and many of these chemicals. So you would see that many of these are heavy. When there is excess amount of neutrons and these are heavy, they could disintegrate. They become unstable nucleus. And when you have unstable nucleus, then in addition to that, sometimes you would also have the characteristic radiation. Where do they come from? These are the binding energy. Remember, I'm showing different shells, the K, L, M, and different shells. So the closer it is to the nucleus, the more energy it has. So it's more difficult to knock off that electron which is closest to the nucleus. And if you knock it off, then the higher is the energy which will be released. So this again is important when we'll talk about the X-rays and how to modulate the X-rays. Radioactivity, again, these are colors. So it's naturally occurring radioactive materials which occur in nature, and radioactivity induced by neutron bombardment, or radioactivity induced by proton bombardment, or the fission products. So as you see that you have neutron bombardment, so you produce P32, neutron bombardment, cobalt, you produce cobalt-60 along with gamma rays. You have a proton bombardment, and then you could have a fission product which releases a lot of energy. So this is just to show we're not talking about radioactivity today. Show that so many different colors in the palette of colors, a lot of them are produced from inside the nucleus, and many of them are produced outside the nucleus. And in 120 years of radiation oncology, we have used almost every color in this big palette. Some are still popular, like the gamma rays and electrons. Some are aspirational, like protons and heavy ions, and some we rarely use. So now I will come to the coloring instruments of use. We have talked about the colors, and we have talked about the artist, about the canvas and the colors. So coloring instruments of use. So coloring instruments of use is the linacs, the brachytherapy machines, applicators, devices, planning and dosimetric equipment that can produce and use ionizing radiation to give them shape, form, and depth for richness. It is not just producing them. They have to be given shape, they have to be given form, and they have to reach to a certain depth for us to have the richness in our creation. And see, this is, I've called the X-ray tube as the mighty X-ray tube, and this is just my modern linac. Why I've called it mighty X-ray tube? You may wonder why you still have to read about the X-ray tube. I mean, it is obsolete. I mean, you don't really need it as radiation oncologist. If a radiologist has to read, because they still have this is still known as X-ray department, or sometimes they are referred to the X-ray department. Why should a radiation oncologist need and understand about an X-ray tube? Because a lot of what we know and a lot of developments have happened in refining the X-ray tube. First 50, 60 years of radiation oncology was entirely dependent on two things. One was the X-ray tube, and the other was radium. Radium actually came, proper use of radium started about 20-25 years after Madame Curie had, discovered it. So the X-ray tube, each and every aspect of X-ray tube, right from the thermalic emission of electrons. So why do you need vacuum? What should be the potential difference? What happens when the fast-moving electron in vacuum hits the anode? What will happen with the heating of the anode? Why you need a rotating anode? All those aspects. And once you understand how much they struggle just to control the heat generated by the X-rays when they hit the target, and how damage it could do to the target, what was the heal effect, all those aspects when you'll understand, because decades went to improve or stabilize the X-ray tube. And a lot of fractionation, although we say that so and so did this experiment on the ram testicle or something else, a lot of fractionation happened because the X-ray tubes in earlier years were not really good. They will break down, so you will call the patient again. So it did not come to them intuitively that radiation has to be fractionated. I mean, it was a need because you had to treat that many patients in that day, and the machine was breaking down, so you have to call them, come again tomorrow. And of course, in the modern linac, it is like a very fine instrument which you can control. You can choose the type of colors you could have. You could have electrons of different energies. You could have photons. And not only you can have a different energy of the photons, you can shape the size and the intensity of how, like the stroke of brush, how we with a light brush or a deep brush, or if you're using with pencils, different shades and softness of pencil, how you create an artwork. So today a modern linac can do a lot. I think it is a marvelous machine, a modern linac of any company, any make. The things it can do, it was unimaginable when I was a trainee, like many of you are there. So it is of course now you have some more better things also which are available. So it starts with interaction between the colors and coloring instruments. So when it hits the target, so you can see H is the heat which is produced. When I was talking about the amount of heat it is producing, a lot of thing goes in just producing heat, but some of it comes out as a useful energy, which is X-ray, which is produced, and that is what we use the photon for treating patients and also for taking X-rays. And depending on the energy of the photon or the X-ray, which is your main color, there will be either a photoelectric effect at lower energy and for high Z material, or it will be predominantly Compton effect for high energy X-rays, and then rest everything doesn't matter. Then in interaction, as you will see, the spatial distribution, when you have a low energy, it is more or less like a spatial distribution. And when you have a high energy, it is mostly in the forward direction. And the beam which comes out is sort of conical, so you have to flatten the beam. So that is what you have to do. So you have flattening filters, and I will talk more about this thing. And this is through a thin target. So you have flattening filter, and targets could be transmission type or reflection type. You will read about this. You will have discussions on this. And so you remember when we were talking about the continuous spectrum and the characteristic spectrum. So why you get all these lines A, B, C, D, E? Why we can't get energy X-rays with an energy higher than 200? Why the average energy is about 1/3 of the peak? When they used to say kVp, so the peak energy which was applied. So all these are very important aspects, and you have to understand. And when you will read through those chapters, like production of X-ray in Meredith Massey, it's a beautiful thing. So you will say, why I need to understand about how X-rays were produced from an X-ray tube. But once you understand, a lot of concepts will become clear, and they are still relevant, those concepts. You may not use an X-ray tube, but those concepts are important. Then improving the coloring instruments. So let us say the machine, I'm again referring to the X-ray tube. I'm not discussing more of linac. That will be a separate class for that. So what is the ideal solution? The ideal solution is remove all the low energy X-rays and you retain only the high energy X-rays. So why that is not possible? What will be the trade-off if you want to remove all of these X-rays? How much it will result in reduction in the intensity of the X-rays? So this is desirable. A is desirable, that you remove all the low energy X-rays, but B is practical, like some low energy X-rays come, but most of the high energy X-rays are retained. So this is what has happened, and this is how you improve just by using a filter to begin with. That itself was a major improvement in the X-ray tube design. And this concept of half value layer, this like your trainees in the department, you would not hear HVL unless in terms of radiation protection. If someone is using about how many HVL, you have to talk about design of the bunker, half value layer, 10th value layer, all those aspects. But in earlier years, when these artists were playing with this colors and these coloring instruments, HVL was very important because that told us about the quality of the radiation. So this term also, we don't use the quality of radiation because we wanted a hardened beam. Hardened beams, the soft X-rays were removed. And these are different type of filters. For 80 kV, just 2 mm aluminium, then 200 kV, we have added aluminium, copper, tin, copper, aluminium, different kind of thing. And this is the HVL. So the higher is the HVL, that means more penetrating, or the hardened the beam it is. And then above 1 MV, it is just 5 mm lead. So why we are discussing this? So this is something, in the exams, we are just shown something flattish. So what is this? So it's a Thorus filter. Thorus was a famous Swedish physicist. So, I mean, many people remember, they will say, so this is Thorus filter. Okay, there's Thorus 1, Thorus 2. But this is important that, if unfiltered beam with a tin filter, and when you have a compound filter which has tin, copper, and aluminium. And it is very important for you to understand why you need all these three things. That you would remember, if you remember, there is a continuous and line spectra, characteristic spectra, and from where it is produced because of the energy levels. Remember the sodium light and the mercury light. And then in which direction should face the X-ray tube and which direction towards the patient. I think if someone can answer that correctly without thinking, just in a flash, that means you have understood these very basic elements of how these colors are produced and how you modulate or improvise your coloring instrument. So I think these are very important. You might say, well, it doesn't matter. This is really basically forming the concepts of how to use the colors and improve coloring instruments. Of course, from there, if you go to protons, today we have moved to protons. We talk about, protons and particles. They have a Bragg's peak. So this is X-rays. So there is slow attenuation of the beam after it reaches the peak. Again, this itself is to understand that why do they have skin sparing effect. Sometimes it does not, we don't understand it intuitively why high energy X-rays are skin sparing. And I think after X-rays and improvement of X-ray tube, the second biggest advancement in our specialty was mega voltage. And mega voltage, one of the things is not just the deep beams were going more penetrating or they were sharper beams, but it was skin sparing. Otherwise, the skin will break down, and the skin is the most important layer of the canvas. And if that is spoiled, then you will not be able to reach, your colors will not be able to reach the deeper aspects of the canvas, which is the tumor. So the skin sparing effect of the radiation was the most important, the mega voltage. And now you have the protons, not just now, they have been there, right from the beginning. We have now, we can use it better. So there will be Bragg peak, so that it will just all the energy, maximum energy is deposited towards the end, but you could spread out Bragg peak. So the tumor gets a full dose and rest of it is reduced. Then this, again from Meredith Massey, I'm showing this. So there was Röntgen to rad conversion factor. I mean, good Lord, that we don't have to use this F for different tissues and different energy, but many old-time radiation oncologists, the pioneers, had to use it. They would remember by heart many of these values. And why it is important, because it is just talking about not just the interaction between the color and the canvas, which is the different energies and the body, but also the coloring solution instruments, the coloring instrument solution. So as you see, this is again because of the photoelectric effect. Now you will certainly, when you read the photoelectric effect or interaction of X-ray with matter, you will understand why it is important to understand what causes photoelectric effect and how that can be taken care of. So whenever there is a high Z material, bone has more of calcium and the energy is less, you see the conversion factor is much more. It absorbs much more dose than rest of the tissues like water or muscle. But when you coloring instrument solution, you just keep on increasing the energy of the photon by using using instead of X-ray tube, high energy X-ray tube, or even look at even at 200 kV X-rays, it is more or less the same. Okay, so by increasing the energy of the X-ray and by the X-ray tube and then later on Linacs, you obliterate this effect. And if you have to use a low energy X-ray, you see that the bone is not coming in the field. And so this is a beautiful picture from Meredith Massey in this figure 76 of chapter number, I think 9 or something, I can't remember offhand. So look at the bone. In the center of the bone, the dose deposited is much higher. And that would cause damage to the bone, and the vessel inside the bone will get much higher dose, and that will cause necrosis. And in earlier days, radiation oncologists, if they did not damage the skin and the skin permitted delivery of full doses of radiation, then they risked radiation necrosis, especially in the jaw and some other regions where the bone was closed. Now, after we've talked about the artist, the canvas, the colors, coloring instruments, the one thing about the artist, I'm talking about it again, is artist has to respect the critics and is a connoisseur. So when you say respect the critics, I mean, in earlier time, radiation oncology, they were self-critics. So they did not have self-doubts. Of course, at times they must have had self-doubts because, they were doing many things, but they were also thinking. There were coming patients who were getting skin reactions, patients who were coming after a few years with a necrosis of the jaw, tumors which were regressing, then again coming back. So it must be a frustrating job. So talking and working with engineers and the physicists, they improved the coloring instruments. They knew which colors or which kind of radiations to use. Brachytherapy was a major thing. So in the days when, in the pre-mega voltage era, there were institutes, cancer institutes. They were called Christie Radium Institute, Radium Hemet. In India, in Patna or Assam, Ranchi, there was a radium road. So radium, when it was placed very close to the tumor, it could give a very high cancericide dose, causing least damage to the adjacent organ. So this would obviously can be done for localized tumors. And the limitation of the high energy X-rays were not available for teletherapy. Whatever was best available was brachytherapy, radium, and they made the best use of it. And some of the results which were obtained by Christie Hospital, people have still not improved stage for stage for very early stage cervical cancer, not in terms of control, not just in terms of control rates, but also in terms of sparing the rectum and the bladder. So when you're talking about critics and being a connoisseur, so this book, Sense and Sensibility, when it first came, it was just written by a lady, Jane Austen. I mean, that was unthinkable. A lady would write such a wonderful thing, Sense and Sensibility. So there were two sisters. And later on, I think about 95, this movie came, 7 Academy Award nomination. I did not know that. So, Hugh Grant, the handsome Hugh Grant and Emma Thompson. So they played the roles. And why I'm showing this, because I like the two things in these characters. So see what she says. And I think I'm just imagine what this person is, a physicist or a radiation oncologist. The more I know of the world, the more I am convinced that I shall never see a man whom I can really love. I require so much. Sometimes when you are not a very experienced radiation oncologist, you read a paper, see something, this is what they achieved, these are the constraints they could achieve, and this is what has happened. And then you look at your physicists, they look at your plan and then say, well, the more plans I see, the more physicists I see, I know that I would never really like a plan. Why don't I get something which is published in this red journal? Remember, whatever is published, what people show in the slides is the best one. No one really shows an average or the bad ones, unless until they have to show an example and they will give a reason why it happened. So this is a reality. And when as radiation oncologists, and this will happen unless until you have nuances. Ultimately, you remember there are colors. It is a photon. Photon, if it has entered, it will exit and it will just not disappear. Okay. So if you want entry from this direction, if you want entry, they are only limited. You can only move it around 360 degrees. You can only use different planes. You say, okay, let us use non-coplanar. How many planes you could use? How much degree of freedom you have? How many? And ultimately, it's a photon you are dealing with. So that is the first thing. Sometimes radiation oncologists do not, keep in mind that photons have an exit just because using intensity modulated, because you have seen a plan which it conforms very tightly, there will be low dose spillage. It will not disappear. And even if proton is there, so when you have a proton, then you have an air cavity, then something else, a bone. So you suddenly have, okay, I got a proton machine, I got this high energy proton machine, then why my plan is not perfect? Why can't you be sure this is what I'm going to get? So this is basically because you have not understood the concepts. And where different concepts are applicable, we have not understood the canvas. This is bone, this is air, this is a liquid. This canvas could change. This is the colors, which is could be low energy X-rays, could be high energy X-rays, could be proton, it could be heavy ion. So unless until you understand, no planning system in the world would do that. Sometimes you go to a different department, a higher center in India or abroad, you will see, oh, they have this planning system. What wonderful. They use this algorithm. Wish my physicist or my center has this and they can use this. So this is, if you do not pay attention, this is what will happen. Now, what does this man say? Hugh Grant. So I will say that he's the physicist. That was a radiation oncologist, now the physicist. So there was at times, no, this is being said about this person, sorry. It's not, he's not saying it, he's saying there was at times a want of spread about him, which, if it did not denote indifference, spoke something almost as unpromising. So you know what, physicists, they don't tell us, but I'm sure they talk among themselves. And if I was a physicist, I would say exactly the same. They said the radiation oncologists expect so much of precision from us. They tell us, okay, now you improve this, reduce the dose. This is not acceptable. This will be very harmful for the patient. What will I tell the patient? But in terms of contouring, and they are not doing comparison between radiation oncologists. So it is for the same person. Sometimes you draw like this, sometimes you draw like that. So the precision of contouring itself is very little. And we know whenever any study has been looked at, comparison between 2 or 3 or 5 radiation oncologists, you would see it all goes haywire. So that's why you thought, okay, we will have contouring guidelines and it will improve. Even after contouring guidelines, some people take it like, Bible, which they are not. Someone thought this is how this area should be treated. So the physicists see that our imprecision in contouring. Physicists also see sometimes they will gladly accept it, sometimes they'll be very critical. So because the physicists may not know what, as radiation oncologists, what we are thinking about the canvas, which is, it could be the reserve of that organ. It could be, so the same DVH, we look at it. So we talk about in this patient, this is the reserve of this organ. This is what is the condition of this patient. I may not accept it. So that's why medical physicists, earlier days, we would have medical physicists. So a radiation oncologist, medical physicists would spend a lot of time together, not just improving the plan, but discussing, talking about the patient. So they will be more of clinical physicists. Now the physicists are more of basically physicists on the computer and on the machine. Of course, I'm not saying all of them, but less of clinical physicists we have now, as we had when I started my training more than 30 years ago. So talking about the color palette, so we have the colors and coloring instruments, and you all are trainees are artists in making. So an artist in making who is teaching how to make a beautiful original creation. You are training to make how to make a beautiful original creation by gaining good knowledge and feel of the canvas, its type and texture, which is the human body, the organs, and various things. The colors, it shades, types, and spread different kind of ionizing radiation. The coloring instruments of use, the things that you have in your center or you may have later on in your center or other centers. And you can conceptualize, imagine, and look above your eyeglasses to foresee the finished work. That is important. And you respect the critics and is a connoisseur. Initially, anyone who can teach you how to do contouring, I mean, you just look at them who can do contouring, just comes and you are struggling and just come up. And it's a time, only a matter of time. Then just computers today, even now they are doing. First time when as resident we saw auto contouring, we were so happy. Otherwise, each slice by slice, we were drawing lung and bones and all, which you can just do with a click of auto contouring. And the AI methods, which could also put a plan. We developed class solution. But despite all the AI, machine learning, class solutions, you will always have to individualize. If you want to go beyond, if your artwork has to appeal to that tumor and the normal tissue, you have to individualize. Even if you're using a proton, you actually have to individualize more. And finally, we have to need a vision of healing without hurting. So this is the last slide. I think we have a few minutes. So synesthesia. Synesthesia, I had not heard this term some time ago. It's a fascinating phenomenon. And maybe some of you will develop this self-experimentation like Kandinsky, and I will just try to play a YouTube video. So he was an artist who actually could hear colors, shapes. So some colors for him was like violin, some of them was like a different thing. So I will just see if this plays and whether this will have to be shared.
Win at work by communicating effectively with Grammarly. Make time. He is emailing a tutor.
Okay.
What do you hear when you see this? These figures at the bottom left. Is this a murmuring crowd or a group waiting quietly for something to happen? What about this black monolith? A dead, empty space or an instrument? A piano maybe? If it's a piano,
So we are not able to see the video screen.
Debussy or maybe even Schoenberg or Scriabin. But what do you hear when you see this color? Anything? For the artist, for Vasily Kandinsky, this color sounded like loud, sharp trumpets.
I'm just trying to.
He had what's called synesthesia, a condition where people experience the activation of one sense.
One second, let me see how to put
For
this
Kandinsky, this
YouTube
meant that when he heard
video.
sounds, he saw color. And when he saw color, he heard music. And this painting, Impression 3, Concert, is his visual response to the experience of hearing a concert, a music by his contemporary and friend, the composer Arnold Schoenberg. What this painting tells us is that color and its relationship with sound and music are very important to him. But it also shows us Kandinsky's drive to make his paintings more
Just one
abstract,
second, let me just try to. This is worth sharing.
or anything in nature. Kandinsky believed that the more abstract the form, the more clear and direct its appeal. And he felt that music
Where
was the
is this?
pinnacle
I'm
of
really not a
abstraction.
good.
He wrote the following: music has been the art which has devoted itself not to the reproduction of natural phenomena, but rather to the expression of the artist's soul.
I think I will share this. I am unable to
In the knowledge
share
of
the
its impressions, depiction
YouTube
of the sea,
video which on
waves,
this.
storm, and
I will.
wind. You can also listen without knowing anything about the composition, and it can still have a profound effect. Music is inherently abstract, and this is what Kandinsky was aiming for in art. He
Okay.
wanted his paintings to be an expression of an inner need, an expression of his soul.
Just give me a minute. I think I can.
Kandinsky was born in Moscow in 1866, and he began his career studying and eventually teaching law and economics. It was only through two formative experiences that he would eventually abandon his teaching career to become an artist. One was an exhibition of Monet.
Okay, I think I was unable to share that. So thank you very much. If any one of you have any questions or comments or like to share how you honed your skills as an artist, it will be really very nice.